She was forced into marriage with a man everyone looked down on, but the secret he hid was even more shocking. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. You will marry him, Haley, and that is final. The words hit her like a physical blow. Haley Peterson stared at her father across the worn kitchen table, her hands trembling as she gripped her coffee mug. The morning light streaming through their tiny apartment window seemed to mock the darkness of what he had just announced. "Daddy, you cannot be serious." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "You cannot just—" "I can and I will." Frank Peterson's weathered face was stone, but she caught the flicker of shame in his eyes before he looked away. "The debt is real, Haley. $25,000. Money I borrowed from Richard Caldwell to keep us afloat after your mother died. Money I cannot pay back." Haley set down her mug with shaking hands. $25,000. It might as well have been $25 million for all their ability to repay it. Her job at the local diner barely covered their rent and groceries, and her father's construction work had dried up after his back injury 6 months ago. "There has to be another way," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I can get a second job. We can sell the car. There is no other way." Frank's voice cracked. "Richard Caldwell is not a patient man, and his terms were clear. The debt must be settled one way or another." "So you sold me." The accusation hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Frank Peterson aged 10 years in that moment. His shoulders sagged, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "His son needs care. Winston he has challenges, physical limitations. The family thinks a wife might help him, give him stability. And it would clear our debt." Winston Caldwell. Haley had heard whispers about him around town. The eldest son of the wealthy farming family, the one who rarely left the family estate. People spoke of him with pity when they spoke of him at all. The disabled one. "Do not say it like that." Frank's voice sharpened. "He is a human being, not a collection of limitations. A human being you are trading me to like I am livestock." The silence that followed was deafening. Frank Peterson had been a good father once, before grief and bad decisions had hollowed him out. Looking at him now, Haley could see the man he used to be fighting with the desperate stranger he had become. "I never wanted this for you," he whispered finally. "But if we do not settle this debt, Richard Caldwell will take everything. This apartment, what little we have left. We will be on the street, and then what help will I be to you?" Haley closed her eyes. Her mother's face appeared in her mind, beautiful and strong even in her final days. Margaret Peterson had fought cancer with grace and dignity, never complaining even when the medical bills had mounted higher than any working-class family could hope to manage. She had made Haley promise to take care of Frank, to be the strong one. "What kind of marriage would this be?" Haley asked quietly. "A practical one." Richard was clear about that. "You would live at the estate, help care for Winston, be his companion. In return, the debt disappears, and you would have security, a home, financial stability. And love? What about love, Daddy?" Frank Peterson looked at his daughter, really looked at her for the first time in months. At 30, Haley had her mother's delicate features, but her own unique strength. Her dark brown hair fell in waves around her face, and her green eyes held a depth that spoke of someone who had seen too much hardship too young. She deserved better than this. She deserved everything. "Sometimes love grows from respect and kindness," he said softly. "Your mother and I, we started as friends. The love came later. Mother chose you. I would be choosing nothing. I would be fulfilling a debt contract. You would be choosing to save us both." The manipulation in his words was gentle but unmistakable. Haley felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Ever since her mother's death 3 years ago, she had been the one holding their small family together, working double shifts, managing their finances, making sure her father ate and took his medications. Now he was asking her to sacrifice her entire future. "When?" she asked. "The meeting is this afternoon. Richard wants to finalize the arrangements." "This afternoon?" Haley's voice pitched higher. "You have been planning this behind my back, and I get a few hours' notice. I have been trying to find another way for months. This morning was my deadline. It was this or—" He gestured helplessly around their modest apartment. "This or lose everything." Haley stood up abruptly, pacing to the small window that looked out over the parking lot of their complex. Everything about their life was small, cramped, limited. She had dreamed once of college, of travel, of finding someone who would love her completely. Those dreams felt childish now, luxuries she could not afford. "Tell me about him," she said without turning around. "Tell me about Winston." Frank cleared his throat uncomfortably. "He is 34, quiet, keeps to himself mostly. The family says he has some mobility issues, needs help with daily tasks sometimes." "What kind of mobility issues?" "I do not know the details." Richard did not elaborate. Haley turned to face her father. "You are asking me to marry a man you know nothing about, to live with a family of strangers, to give up any chance of choosing my own life. And you cannot even tell me what I'm walking into. The Caldwells are wealthy, respected. You would want for nothing. Except freedom, except choice, except the possibility of real love." Frank Peterson stood up, his movements stiff and painful. The back injury that had cost him his job was getting worse, not better. Even if they found another solution to the debt, how long before he could not work at all? How long before Haley was supporting them both on her diner wages? "I know I am asking too much," he said quietly. "I know this is not fair, but I am drowning, Haley, and I am taking you down with me. At least this way you would have security, a good home, a family with resources, a family that sees me as hired help for their son. Maybe, or maybe they would come to see you as I do, as someone precious, someone worthy of respect and care." Haley felt tears prick at her eyes. Her father's faith in her had always been unshakable, even when she could not share it herself. She was not precious. She was ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of woman who served coffee and cleaned tables and worried about making rent. The kind of woman who apparently could be traded to settle debts. "What happens if I say no?" she asked. Frank's face crumpled. "Then we lose everything within the week, and Richard Caldwell is not the type of man who forgets or forgives. He would make sure I never work in this county again." The trap was complete and perfect. Say yes, and sacrifice her freedom. Say no, and watch her father lose everything because of choices he had made in desperation and grief. Either way, her dreams died today. "I need time to think." "The meeting is at 2 o'clock, at the Caldwell estate." Haley looked at the kitchen clock. It was barely past 10 in the morning, 4 hours to decide the rest of her life. "I am going for a walk," she said. "Haley, do not follow me. Do not call me. I need to think, and I cannot do that here." She grabbed her jacket and purse, not trusting herself to look at her father again. If she saw the desperation and shame in his eyes one more time, she might make a decision based on pity rather than wisdom. The October air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere in their apartment. Haley found herself walking toward the center of town, past the shops and restaurants where she had spent her entire life. Everything looked different now, seen through the lens of potential goodbye. She stopped in front of the library where she had spent countless hours as a child, losing herself in stories of adventure and romance. The irony was not lost on her. She was about to enter a story of her own, but instead of an adventure, it felt like a prison sentence. "Haley Peterson, is that you?" She turned to find Mrs. Chen, her old high school English teacher, approaching with a warm smile. Mrs. Chen had always believed in her, had encouraged her to apply for college scholarships, had been devastated when Haley had chosen to stay home and care for her sick mother instead. "Hello, Mrs. Chen. You look troubled, dear. Is everything all right?" Haley almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. All right. She was about to be married off to a disabled stranger to pay her father's debts. Nothing would ever be all right again. "Just thinking about some big changes," she said instead. Mrs. Chen studied her with the sharp eyes that had made her such an effective teacher. "Changes can be opportunities, you know. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning. What if the change is not your choice? What if it is forced on you?" "Ah," Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. "You know, I have been teaching for 40 years, and I have learned something important. We always have choices, even when it does not feel like it. The choice might not be whether something happens to us, but how we respond to it, how we grow from it, how we maintain our dignity and our sense of self no matter what circumstances we face." Haley felt fresh tears threaten. What if you have to choose between your own happiness and your family's survival? Then you choose survival, and you find ways to create happiness within that choice. Humans are remarkably adaptable, Haley. We can bloom in the most unlikely soil. Mrs. Chen reached out and squeezed Haley's hand. "Whatever you are facing, remember that you are stronger than you know. Your mother knew it. I know it. Someday, you will know it too." After Mrs. Chen left, Haley sat on a bench outside the library and forced herself to think practically. What did she know about the Caldwell family? Richard Caldwell owned one of the largest farming operations in the county. The family had money, influence, respect. They lived on a sprawling estate outside town, the kind of place Haley had only seen from the road. Winston was the eldest son, but she had never seen him at any community events or local gatherings. His younger brother Marcus was the visible heir, the one who handled the business side of the operation and dated a string of appropriate young women from other wealthy families. Winston remained a mystery, spoken of in hushed tones when he was mentioned at all. What would it be like to live with him, to care for him, to be married to someone she had never even met? The thought terrified her, but underneath the fear was something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe just the recognition that her current life offered no real prospects anyway. She was 30 years old, unmarried, with no college education and few marketable skills beyond serving food and making small talk with customers. Her romantic history consisted of a few brief relationships with men who had ultimately wanted something she could not give, either more excitement than her quiet nature provided or less responsibility than her family situation demanded. At least Winston Caldwell would not expect her to be someone she was not. Their arrangement would be practical, clear-cut. She would provide companionship and care, and in return, she would have security and a home. It was not love, but it was honest. By the time she walked back to the apartment, her decision was made. Frank was waiting for her at the kitchen table, still in the same position she had left him hours earlier. He looked up when she entered, his face full of desperate hope. "I will do it," she said quietly. Relief and guilt warred across his features. "Haley, I have conditions." He nodded eagerly. "Anything. I want to meet him first. Before any agreements are signed, I want to sit down with Winston and talk to him. If he does not want this arrangement either, then we find another solution. Of course, that is completely reasonable. And I want the exact terms spelled out, what is expected of me, what my rights are, how the household will function. I will not walk into this blind. Richard will have documents prepared. Everything will be official and clear." Haley nodded. The businesslike nature of the discussion helped her maintain her composure. If she started thinking about it as her wedding, as her marriage, she would fall apart. "Then I suppose we should get ready for this meeting." Frank stood up and walked around the table to embrace her. She stiffened at first, then relaxed into his familiar warmth. Whatever his faults, whatever terrible decision had brought them to this point, he was still her father. He was still the man who had read her bedtime stories and taught her to ride a bike and held her when she cried after her mother's funeral. "I am so sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I am so very sorry." "I know, Daddy, I know." 2 hours later, they were driving through the ornate gates of the Caldwell estate. Haley had changed into her best dress, a simple navy blue sheath that her mother had bought her for church, and pulled her hair back into a neat bun. She wanted to look respectable, competent. She wanted to show these people that whatever they thought they were getting, she was not some desperate charity case. The house was even more impressive up close than it had appeared from the road. It was a sprawling colonial mansion with white columns and perfectly manicured grounds. Expensive cars lined the circular driveway, and Haley could see horses grazing in distant pastures. This was a different world entirely from the cramped apartment where she had spent her entire adult life. Richard Caldwell met them at the front door. He was a tall, imposing man in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from generational wealth. His handshake was firm, his smile polite but cold. "Frank, Miss Peterson, please, come in." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, expensive furnishings, artwork that probably cost more than Haley made in a year. Everything was tasteful, traditional, designed to impress. She felt like an imposter walking through rooms that belonged in a magazine. Richard led them to what he called the study, a book-lined room with leather furniture and the lingering scent of tobacco. A woman was waiting for them, tall, elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of understated jewelry that screamed wealth. "This is my wife, Patricia," Richard said. "Patricia, Frank Peterson and his daughter Haley." Patricia Caldwell's smile was even colder than her husband's. Her eyes swept over Haley with obvious assessment, taking in her off-the-rack dress and department store shoes. The judgment was swift and unfavorable. "How lovely to meet you," Patricia said in a tone that suggested it was anything but lovely. "Where is Winston?" Haley asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was hoping to meet him before we discussed any arrangements." Richard and Patricia exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes. "Winston is resting," Patricia said smoothly. "He tires easily, you understand. We thought it would be better to handle the preliminary discussions first. I would prefer to meet my potential husband before those discussions," Haley said firmly. Frank shot her a warning look, but she ignored it. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it on her terms, not theirs. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. "Of course. How reasonable of you. Patricia, would you ask Winston to join us?" Patricia's smile tightened, but she nodded and left the room. During the few minutes she was gone, Richard offered them drinks and made small talk about the weather and the farming season. Haley barely heard him. All her attention was focused on the door, waiting for her first glimpse of the man who might become her husband. When the door opened again, Patricia entered first, followed by a younger man using a walking cane. Haley's first thought was that Winston Caldwell was nothing like what she had expected. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed a trim and intelligent brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His face was pale, almost gaunt, and he moved carefully, as if each step required consideration. But there was nothing pitiful about him. If anything, his careful composure suggested strength, not weakness. "Winston, this is Haley Peterson," Richard said. "Haley, my son Winston." Winston approached her slowly, extending his free hand. His grip was surprisingly strong, his gaze direct and assessing. "Miss Peterson," he said quietly. His voice was cultured, educated, with a slight rasp that suggested he did not use it often in company. "I understand you have been told about our family's, proposal." "I have." Haley found herself studying his face, looking for signs of the limitations his parents had described. What she saw instead was intelligence, wariness, and something that might have been resignation. "And I would like to hear your thoughts about it." Winston's eyebrows rose slightly, mirroring his father's earlier expression. "My thoughts? Yes, this arrangement affects both of us. I think we should discuss it together." For the first time since entering the house, Haley saw genuine surprise on someone's face. Winston looked at his parents, then back at her, as if no one had ever asked for his opinion before. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we could step outside for a few minutes. I think more clearly in the fresh air." Patricia started to object, but Richard silenced her with a gesture. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Winston led her through French doors onto a stone terrace that overlooked the estate's gardens. The afternoon sun was warm despite the October chill, and the view was breathtaking. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon, dotted with barns and outbuildings and endless fields. "It is beautiful," Haley said softly. "Yes." Winston settled carefully into one of the wrought iron chairs that furnished the terrace. "I spend most of my time out here. The house can feel confining." Haley took the chair across from him, noting how he positioned his cane within easy reach. Up close, she could see that his left leg seemed weaker than his right, and his hands had a slight tremor that he tried to hide. "What happened to you?" she asked gently. Winston's laugh was bitter. "Childhood illness. Rheumatic fever that damaged my heart and left me with some mobility issues. Nothing dramatic or romantic, I am afraid. Just bad luck and genetics." "It must be difficult." "The limitations are manageable. The assumptions people make about the limitations are more challenging." There was something in his tone that made Haley look at him more carefully. Intelligence radiated from him like heat, and she began to suspect that Winston Caldwell was far more capable than his family gave him credit for. "Tell me honestly," she said, "do you want this marriage?" Winston was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "Do you?" "I asked first." "Fair enough." He adjusted his glasses, a gesture that seemed habitual when he was thinking, "I want independence. I want to be seen as something other than a burden or an object of pity. If marriage to you accomplishes that, then yes, I want it. And if it does not, then at least I will have tried something different than hiding in my room and pretending not to exist." Haley felt an unexpected stab of sympathy. She'd thought her life was limited, but at least she had work, responsibilities, a place in the world. Winston seemed to have been relegated to the margins of his own family. "What would you expect from me?" she asked. "As your wife?" "Honestly," Winston leaned forward slightly, "I have no idea. I have never been married. I have barely been allowed to have friendships. What I hope for is companionship, someone to talk to. Someone who sees me as a person rather than a collection of medical issues, and in return, you would have security, a home, freedom from whatever financial pressures brought you here." His voice was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. "I know this is not a love match, Miss Peterson. I know you are here because your father owes mine money, but perhaps we can build something decent from practical beginnings." Haley was quiet for several minutes, absorbing his words. There was no deception in them, no false promises or romantic illusions, just honesty, which was more than she had expected. "What is your family like to live with?" she asked finally. Winston's expression darkened. "Difficult. They mean well, but they see me as an eternal child who needs constant supervision and protection. They would likely see you as another caretaker, at least initially. And how do you see me? I see someone who is brave enough to consider marrying a stranger to save her father. Someone who asks direct questions and expects honest answers. Someone who might be willing to take a chance on building something real from something arranged. There it was. The possibility she had not dared to hope for. Not love, not romance, but something real. Something chosen, even within the constraints of their circumstances. I have one more question, she said. Ask it. Are you as limited as your family believes you are? Winston went very still. For a moment, Haley thought she had overstepped, pushed too hard, too fast. Then he smiled, and it transformed his entire face. What makes you think I am not? The way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the books I can see on your windowsill from here. You do not strike me as someone who spends his days being taken care of. You are very observant, and you are not answering my question. Winston was quiet for so long that Haley began to think he would not answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. There are things about my life that my family does not know. Things I have learned to keep private because it is easier than fighting their assumptions. If you marry me, Haley Peterson, you might discover that I am more than I appear to be. Is that a warning or a promise? Both. They sat in comfortable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Haley found herself studying Winston's profile, noting the intelligence in his eyes and the quiet strength in the way he held himself. He was not what she had expected, not what anyone would expect. There were layers here, depths that his family seemed determined to ignore. I think, she said finally, that we should give this a try. Winston turned to look at her fully. Are you certain? I am certain that my current life offers me nothing but endless worry and limited possibilities. I am certain that you seem like a decent man who deserves better than to be treated like an invalid. And I am certain that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that terrify you most. Then you will marry me. I will marry you, Winston Caldwell, and we will figure out the rest as we go. Winston stood carefully, extending his hand to help her up. Then I suppose we should go back inside and make this official. As they walked back toward the French doors, Haley caught a glimpse of movement in one of the upstairs windows. A curtain falling back into place, as if someone had been watching them. She wondered what the family had expected to see, what they thought of this strange courtship playing out on their terrace. Winston, she said quietly, just before they reached the door. Yes, whatever secrets you are keeping, whatever you have not told them about yourself, I hope someday you will trust me enough to share them. Winston paused with his hand on the door handle. And I hope someday I will be brave enough to do exactly that. They found the three parents waiting expectantly in the study. Richard had prepared a stack of documents, and Patricia had arranged for tea service as if this were a social visit rather than a business transaction. Well, Richard asked as they took their seats. We have decided to proceed, Winston said calmly. Assuming the terms are reasonable. The next hour was a blur of legal language and formal arrangements. Haley would move to the estate within the week. She would have her own room initially, with the understanding that she and Winston would determine their living arrangements as they became comfortable with each other. She would receive a modest allowance for personal expenses, and her father's debt would be considered settled upon the signing of the marriage certificate. It was all very civilized, very proper, very businesslike. No one mentioned love or happiness or dreams. Those were luxuries that people like Haley could not afford. As they drove home in the gathering dusk, Frank Peterson finally broke the silence that had stretched between them since leaving the estate. Are you all right with this? Really? Haley considered the question. Was she all right with marrying a man she had known for less than an hour, with moving into a house where she would be seen as little more than a servant, with giving up any chance of finding real love? "I think Winston and I understand each other," she said finally. "We both know what this is and what it is not. There is something to be said for that kind of honesty." "He seems like a good man." "He does. Different than I expected." "Different how?" Haley thought about Winston's intelligent eyes, his careful questions, his hint that there were things about him his family did not know. "Stronger, I think. More aware. There are depths there that his family does not see." "That could be good or bad." "Yes," Haley agreed, "it could be." Back in her small apartment, Haley began the surreal process of preparing to leave the only life she had ever known. She had 5 days to pack her belongings, quit her job at the diner, and say goodbye to the few friends she had managed to maintain despite her responsibilities. The hardest part was calling her supervisor at the diner to explain that she would not be returning. How did you tell someone that you were getting married to solve a debt problem? How did you explain that you were about to become part of a family that clearly saw you as hired help? "I am getting married," she said simply. "Married?" Janet's voice was incredulous. "To who? You have not mentioned dating anyone." "It happened quickly. His name is Winston Caldwell." There was a pause. "Caldwell, as in the rich farming family?" "Yes." "Haley, honey, are you sure about this? That family, they keep to themselves, and their oldest son, he is what? Well, he is sick, is he not? Never comes to town, never socializes. Are you sure you know what you're getting into?" "I'm sure I know exactly what I'm getting into," Haley said firmly. "And I am sure it is the right decision." After she hung up, Haley sat in her bedroom and looked around at the life she was about to leave behind. Everything she owned fit into 3 suitcases and a few boxes, 30 years of living. And she had so little to show for it, but maybe that was not entirely true. She had her integrity, her determination, her ability to see beneath surface appearances. She had her mother's strength and her father's loyalty, even when that loyalty had led them both into impossible situations. And now she had Winston Caldwell, with his intelligent eyes and hidden depths and promise of something more than either of them appeared to be. It was not love, but it was possibility, and for someone who had lived her entire life within narrow constraints, possibility felt like freedom. On her last night in the apartment, Haley sat at the kitchen table where her father had delivered his devastating news just 5 days earlier. The wedding was scheduled for the following Saturday, a simple civil ceremony with minimal witnesses. Then she would move to the Caldwell estate and begin her new life as Winston's wife. "Are you ready for this?" Frank asked, settling into the chair across from her. "I do not think anyone can be ready for something like this. But I am prepared, and that will have to be enough. I never thought I would be the kind of father who arranged his daughter's marriage." "You are not that kind of father. You are the kind of father who made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. I understand the difference." Frank reached across the table and took her hands in his. "Your mother would be proud of you. The strength you are showing, the grace. She would be so proud." "I hope so. I hope I'm making the right choice. You are choosing to save our family and give yourself a chance at a better life. How could that be wrong?" Haley squeezed his hands. "Promise me something, Daddy. Promise me you will take care of yourself. Eat properly, take your medications, find some way to stay busy and useful. Do not let guilt eat you alive." "I promise. And you promise me something too. Promise me you will not settle for less than you deserve. Winston Caldwell may be getting the better end of this bargain, but you are not choiceless. You are not powerless. Remember that." "I will remember." That night, Haley dreamed of her mother. Margaret Peterson appeared to her as she had been before the illness, vibrant and strong and full of life. In the dream, they were walking through a garden that looked remarkably like the grounds of the Caldwell estate. "Change is not always loss," her mother said in the dream. "Sometimes it is growth in disguise." "I'm scared, Mama." "Good. Fear means you are paying attention. Fear means you understand that what you are choosing matters. What if I cannot make him happy? What if I cannot make this work?" Margaret Peterson smiled. "Happiness is not something you make for someone else, sweetheart. It is something you create together, day by day, choice by choice. Be kind, be honest, be brave. The rest will follow." Haley woke with tears on her cheeks and her mother's words echoing in her mind. Be kind, be honest, be brave. It was as good a plan as any for starting a marriage with a stranger. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, perfect October weather for a wedding that felt nothing like the celebration she had once imagined for herself. Haley wore her mother's pearl necklace and a simple cream-colored dress that she had bought specifically for the occasion. Her hair was styled in a low chignon, and she carried a small bouquet of white roses that Frank had insisted on purchasing. The ceremony took place at the county courthouse with minimal fanfare. Winston wore a dark suit and moved with careful precision, his cane steady against the marble floors. His parents were there, along with his brother Marcus and a woman Haley assumed was Marcus's girlfriend. Frank stood beside her, proud and heartbroken in equal measure. Judge Henderson, who had known the Caldwell family for decades, performed the brief ceremony with professional efficiency. The words were traditional, binding, final. When Winston slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, Haley felt the weight of her new reality settle around her like a cloak. "You may kiss the bride," Judge Henderson announced. Winston looked at her questioningly, and Haley nodded slightly. His kiss was gentle, brief, the kiss of a stranger who was trying to be respectful. There was no passion in it, but there was kindness, and that felt like enough for now. The small group gathered afterward for lunch at an expensive restaurant in town. Patricia Caldwell made polite conversation about household arrangements and social expectations. Richard discussed business prospects and family obligations. Marcus was charming and conventional, everything his older brother was not. Through it all, Winston was quiet, observant, responding when spoken to but volunteering little. Haley found herself watching him, trying to understand the dynamics of his family relationships. It was clear that he was seen as the fragile one, the one who needed protection and management. But she was beginning to suspect that Winston Caldwell was far more capable of managing himself than anyone realized. After lunch, it was time to say goodbye to Frank. The moment Haley had been dreading had finally arrived. "This is not goodbye forever," she whispered as she hugged her father tightly. "This is just goodbye for now. Be happy, sweetheart. Find joy wherever you can." "I will. I promise." Winston waited patiently while she said her farewells, then helped her into the black sedan that would take them to her new home. As they drove through the gates of the Caldwell estate, Haley realized that everything familiar was now behind her. Everything ahead was unknown. "Are you all right?" Winston asked quietly. "Ask me in a month," Haley replied. Winston smiled. Fair enough. The house looked different now that she was arriving as a resident rather than a visitor. Larger, more imposing, less welcoming. Patricia met them at the door with the kind of smile that was all surface politeness. "Welcome home, dear," she said to Haley, though the words sounded rehearsed. "I have had the blue bedroom prepared for you. It is right down the hall from Winston's room, close enough for convenience, but with adequate privacy." The blue bedroom was beautiful, furnished with antiques and decorated in shades of pale blue and cream. It was larger than Haley's entire apartment had been, with its own sitting area and private bathroom. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the dresser, and someone had unpacked her suitcases and arranged her few belongings in the closet and drawers. "I hope you will be comfortable," Patricia said. "Dinner is served at 7. We dress for dinner in this house, nothing too formal, but we do maintain certain standards." After Patricia left, Haley sat on the edge of the elegant bed and tried to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. She was married, she lived in a mansion. Her husband was a virtual stranger who used a cane and seemed to harbor secrets that his family knew nothing about. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Winston entered carefully, closing the door behind him. He looked around the room with what might have been amusement. "The blue room," he said. "I wondered where they would put you. It is beautiful. It is also as far from the family quarters as possible, while still being on the same floor. My mother's way of making sure you understand your place in the household hierarchy." Haley looked at him sharply. "And what place is that?" "Somewhere between family member and hired help. You are my wife, which gives you a certain status, but you are not one of them, not really. And how do you feel about that?" Winston moved to the window that looked out over the back gardens. "I feel that my family has very fixed ideas about a great many things, and most of those ideas are wrong, including their ideas about you." Winston turned to look at her directly. "Especially their ideas about me." They stood there for a moment, studying each other across the elegant room. Haley had the distinct impression that they were both trying to decide how much truth they were ready to share. "Winston," she said finally, "I want you to know that I meant what I said during our first conversation. I see you as a person, not as a collection of limitations. Whatever your family thinks or assumes, I am going to form my own opinions based on my own observations. And I want you to know that I see you as someone who deserves respect and consideration, not as someone who is here to serve my family's idea of what I need. We are in this together, Haley. Partners, even if we are not lovers." It was the most direct conversation they had yet had, and it felt like a beginning. Not of love, perhaps, but of something equally valuable. Understanding, alliance, the possibility of genuine partnership. "I should let you rest and settle in," Winston said, "but I hope we can talk again soon, really talk. There are things I would like to share with you when you are ready to hear them." After he left, Haley unpacked the last of her belongings and prepared for her first dinner as a member of the Caldwell family. She chose a simple black dress that she hoped would meet Patricia's standards, then stood in front of the mirror and tried to see herself as these people would see her. Plain, common, acceptable for their purposes, but nothing more. But as she looked at her reflection, she remembered Winston's words, partners, allies. Whatever his family thought of her, she had at least one person in this house who saw her as an equal. It was more than she had dared to hope for when this strange journey began. Dinner at the Caldwell estate was an exercise in careful choreography that Haley had never witnessed before. The dining room could have seated 20 people comfortably, but the family of 5 gathered around one end of the massive mahogany table like actors on a stage. Patricia presided from one end, Richard from the other, with Marcus and his girlfriend Stephanie on one side, and Haley and Winston on the other. The conversation was polite, measured, and completely artificial. Patricia discussed the upcoming charity gala that she was organizing. Richard mentioned business prospects for the coming year. Marcus shared updates about his golf handicap and weekend plans. Stephanie, a blonde woman with perfect makeup and expensive clothes, nodded and smiled and said very little. Winston ate quietly, occasionally responding when directly addressed, but otherwise remaining outside the family dynamic. Haley watched the interactions with fascination and growing unease. This was not a family dinner. This was a performance, and everyone except her knew their lines. "Hayley, dear," Patricia said during a lull in the conversation, "I have taken the liberty of arranging for you to meet with our housekeeper tomorrow morning. Mrs. Rodriguez will explain the household routines and show you how we prefer things to be managed." "Thank you," Hayley replied carefully. "What exactly will my responsibilities be?" Patricia's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Well, primarily caring for Winston, of course. Making sure he takes his medications on schedule, helping him with daily tasks that might be challenging, providing companionship. Mrs. Rodriguez can explain the specifics." Hayley felt Winston tense beside her, though his expression remained neutral. "I see. And what about Winston's preferences in these matters? I assume he has opinions about his own care." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus exchanged a glance with his girlfriend. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. Patricia's smile became even more brittle. "Winston understands his limitations," Patricia said finally. "He knows we only want what is best for him." "Of course," Hayley agreed. "But I would still like to hear his thoughts on how he would prefer our daily routine to work." Winston set down his fork deliberately. "Actually, I have been managing quite well on my own for several years now. I take my own medications, handle my own personal care, and spend most of my time on projects that keep me occupied and useful." "Projects?" Richard's eyebrows rose. "What sort of projects?" For a moment, Hayley thought Winston might reveal something significant. But instead, he simply said, "Reading mostly, research. I've been working on some family genealogy, tracking our agricultural heritage." It was smoothly done, deflecting attention without lying outright. But Hayley caught the slight hesitation before he answered, and she suspected there was much more to Winston's daily activities than family research. "How lovely," Patricia said dismissively. "But now that you have Hayley to help you, perhaps you can focus on more social activities, getting out of your room more, joining us for family events." "Perhaps," Winston agreed, but Hayley heard the careful non-commitment in his voice. After dinner, the family gathered in what they called the sitting room for coffee and conversation. It was another ritualistic gathering, with everyone playing their assigned roles. Patricia discussed society gossip with Stephanie, while Richard and Marcus talked business. Winston sat in a corner chair with a book, effectively invisible to the rest of the family. Hayley found herself observing the dynamics with growing clarity. Winston was not just physically separated from his family, he was emotionally isolated as well. They had created a box for him labeled invalid and refused to see anything that contradicted that label. "Hayley," Patricia called. "Come sit with us. I want to hear about your background, your family." Hayley joined the women on the elegant sofa, acutely aware that she was being evaluated. Patricia's questions were polite but probing, designed to establish exactly where Hayley fit in the social hierarchy. "Your father works in construction?" Patricia asked, with the kind of carefully neutral tone that conveyed judgment without stating it directly. "He did. He has been dealing with some health issues recently." "I see. And your mother?" "She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer." "How tragic. She was young." 52. Patricia made appropriate, sympathetic noises, but Hayley could see the mental calculations happening behind her eyes. Working-class family, father with health problems, mother dead of a disease that suggested inadequate medical care. Everything Patricia needed to know about Hayley's place in the world. "And you worked as a waitress before marrying Winston?" "I worked at Miller's Diner, yes. I enjoyed it. I like people, and I am good at taking care of others." "How fortunate for Winston." Patricia said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. From across the room, Haley caught Winston watching the exchange with an expression she could not quite read. Not embarrassment, exactly. More like resignation, mixed with something that might have been anger. When the evening finally ended, Haley walked upstairs beside Winston, both of them moving slowly to accommodate his careful pace. The silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward, the silence of two people who understood that they had just survived something unpleasant together. "Your family is very," Haley began, then stopped, unsure how to finish diplomatically. "Controlling, condescending, completely oblivious to anyone's needs but their own." Haley looked at him in surprise. It was the first time she had heard genuine irritation in his voice. "I was going to say formal," she said carefully. Winston laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "That is the polite word for it." "Yes." They had reached the door to her room. Winston paused, leaning slightly on his cane, and studied her face in the soft hallway lighting. "I want you to know that whatever my mother told you about my care, whatever responsibilities she outlined, you should ignore all of it. I have been taking care of myself for years, and I do not need or want a nursemaid." "Then what do you need?" Winston was quiet for so long that Haley thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I need someone who sees me as I am, not as they want me to be. I need someone who understands that there is a difference between limitation and incapacity, and I need someone who can keep secrets." "What kind of secrets?" "The kind that would change everything if my family knew about them." Haley felt her pulse quicken. "Winston, what are you not telling them?" He reached out and touched her hand briefly, the contact warm and surprisingly steady. "Give me time, Haley. Trust me a little longer, and I promise I will show you exactly who I really am." After Winston left, Haley lay in her elegant new bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything she had observed during her first evening as a member of the Caldwell family. The family dynamics were toxic, built on assumptions and control rather than love and respect. Winston was far more aware and capable than anyone acknowledged. And there were secrets, layers of deception that she was only beginning to glimpse. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Be kind, be honest, be brave." Tomorrow, she would begin to discover just how brave she could be. Haley woke early, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar room and the quality of silence that surrounded her. At home, she had always awakened to traffic noise and the sounds of neighbors. Here, the silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of birds and the whisper of wind through trees. She dressed carefully in jeans and a sweater, clothes that would be appropriate for learning household routines from Mrs. Rodriguez. But first, she wanted to explore her new home and get a sense of the space she would be living in. The house was enormous, with rooms that seemed to serve no purpose other than displaying expensive furniture and artwork. Haley wandered through the formal living room, the library, a music room with a grand piano that looked as if it had never been played. Everything was beautiful, tasteful, and completely sterile. She was examining a collection of family photographs in the hallway when a voice behind her made her jump. Those were taken before Winston got sick. Haley turned to find Marcus approaching with a cup of coffee and a friendly smile. Up close, he was even more handsome than she had realized, with the kind of easy charm that probably made him popular at social gatherings. "He looks different," Haley said, studying a photograph of a younger Winston standing beside a horse. In the picture, he appeared strong and healthy, with none of the careful fragility that characterized his movements now. "He was different," Marcus said, joining her in front of the photographs. "Athletic, outgoing, the kind of guy everyone wanted to be around. The illness changed everything." How old was he when it happened? 16. Rheumatic fever hit him hard, damaged his heart, affected his mobility. He spent months in the hospital, then months more recovering at home. By the time he was well enough to rejoin the world, he had lost all his confidence. He became a different person. Haley studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of genuine concern for his brother. What she saw instead was a kind of casual dismissal, as if Winston's transformation from golden boy to invalid was simply an unfortunate fact of life that everyone had accepted. "He seems intelligent," she said carefully. "Surely he could have found ways to contribute, to feel useful." Marcus shrugged. "He reads a lot, does research projects. Mother tries to encourage him to be more social, but he prefers to stay in his room. We have all learned to work around his limitations. What if his limitations are not as extensive as you think?" Marcus looked at her with surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if Winston is more capable than your family gives him credit for? What if the problem is not his limitations, but your assumptions about them?" "Haley," Marcus said gently, "I know you want to see the best in him. That is admirable. But Winston has been dealing with these health issues for almost 20 years. We know what he can and cannot do. Do you? When was the last time any of you asked him what he wanted to do? When was the last time you encouraged him to try something challenging?" Marcus's friendly expression cooled slightly. "We protect Winston because we love him. We have seen what happens when he overexerts himself, when he tries to do too much. The consequences can be serious." Haley sensed she was treading on dangerous ground, but she could not stop herself from pushing. "What consequences? What happens when he tries to do too much?" "He gets exhausted. Sometimes his heart rhythm becomes irregular. There have been a few incidents over the years that scared us all badly." "Recent incidents?" Marcus hesitated. "Not recently, no. But the doctors were very clear about the long-term prognosis. Winston needs to avoid stress and physical exertion. He needs to accept his limitations and live within them." "What doctors? When was his last full evaluation?" "I do not know the details. Mother handles all his medical care." Haley felt a chill run down her spine. Patricia handled Winston's medical care. A grown man of 34 had his mother managing his health care. "Marcus," she said carefully, "does Winston have any say in his own medical decisions?" "Of course he does. But he trusts Mother to handle the details. It is easier for everyone that way." Before Haley could respond, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the hallway. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Caldwell, I am Maria Rodriguez. Mrs. Patricia said you wanted to discuss the household routines." "Yes, please, and call me Haley." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. "Come, let us talk in the kitchen. I will make you some real coffee, not that weak stuff they serve in the dining room." As they walked toward the kitchen, Haley caught a glimpse of Winston through the window. He was sitting on the same terrace where they had first talked, a laptop computer open in front of him and papers scattered around his chair. She paused, studying the scene. Winston's posture was focused and alert, his fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. Whatever he was working on, it required concentration and skill. "He spends a lot of time out there," Mrs. Rodriguez said, following Haley's gaze. "What does he work on?" Mrs. Rodriguez glanced around carefully, then leaned closer. "Computer things, business things. He is very smart, that boy, much smarter than they give him credit for." "What kind of business things?" "I do not know exactly, but I see the mail that comes for him, the packages, financial documents, legal papers. He gets more mail than anyone else in the family." "Does Patricia know about this?" Mrs. Rodriguez's expression became carefully neutral. "Mrs. Patricia sees what she wants to see. She has decided that Winston is a sick child who needs protecting, and nothing will change her mind. They spent the next hour in the kitchen while Mrs. Rodriguez explained the household routines. The Caldwells employed a small staff, Mrs. Rodriguez, who served as both housekeeper and cook, a part-time gardener, and a cleaning service that came twice a week. The family had specific preferences about everything from meal times to laundry schedules, to which rooms were used for which purposes. And my responsibilities regarding Winston? Haley asked. Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Mrs. Patricia will tell you that Winston needs constant supervision, that he cannot be trusted to take his medications properly, that he requires help with daily tasks, that he should not be left alone for extended periods. And what do you think? I think Winston has been taking care of himself just fine for years. I think he's tired of being treated like an invalid, and I think you might be exactly what he needs to start fighting back. Fighting back against what? Against a family that has decided who he is supposed to be and refuses to see who he actually is. After her conversation with Mrs. Rodriguez, Haley found herself walking through the house with new eyes. She noticed details she had missed before. The way Winston's room was positioned at the end of a long hallway, isolated from the rest of the family quarters. The fact that there were no recent photographs of him anywhere in the public spaces. The way the family spoke about him as if he were not present, even when he was sitting right there. She was examining the contents of the library when Winston appeared in the doorway. "Finding everything you need?" he asked. "Your family has an impressive book collection. Most of it belonged to my grandfather. He was the reader in the family." Winston moved into the room, running his fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes. "I have added a few selections over the years, but they tend to get lost among the classics. Which ones are yours?" Winston showed her a section of newer books, contemporary fiction, biographies, books on business and technology, several volumes on computer programming and web development. It was an eclectic collection that suggested wide-ranging interests and a mind that was anything but limited. "Interesting choices," Haley said, pulling out a book on digital marketing. "I like to stay current with trends in business and technology. It helps me understand how the world is changing." "For your genealogy research?" Winston smiled. "Among other things." Haley replaced the book and turned to face him directly. "Winston, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "This morning I saw you working on the terrace with a laptop. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned that you receive a lot of business mail. Marcus told me that your family handles all your medical decisions. Your mother wants me to supervise your medication schedule. None of this adds up to the picture of someone who spends his days reading and doing genealogy research." Winston was very still, studying her case with those intelligent brown eyes. She could almost see him making calculations, deciding how much truth he was ready to share. "What do you think is really going on?" he asked finally. "I think you are far more independent and capable than your family believes. I think they have created a version of you that fits their need to see you as helpless, and you have allowed them to maintain that illusion for reasons I do not understand yet. And what would you do with that information if it were true? I would ask you why. Why allow them to treat you like an invalid if you are not one? Why accept their control over your life if you are capable of managing it yourself?" Winston moved to one of the library's tall windows, looking out over the estate grounds. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but intense. "Have you ever been trapped in other people's expectations, Haley? Have you ever found that it was easier to play the role they assigned you than to fight for the right to define yourself?" Haley thought about her own life, about years of being seen as the responsible daughter, the dutiful caretaker, the woman whose dreams mattered less than everyone else's needs. Yes, she said softly. I have. Then you understand why someone might choose the path of least resistance, even when that path leads nowhere. But you are not on a path that leads nowhere. You are doing something, building something. The laptop, the business mail, the fact that Mrs. Rodriguez sees financial documents and legal papers. You've been creating a life that your family knows nothing about. Winston turned from the window to look at her directly. What if I told you that everything you think you know about my limitations, everything my family believes about my capabilities, is based on outdated information and assumptions that have not been true for years? Haley felt her heart rate increase. I would say that changes everything. It would change everything. For both of us. Then why have you not told them? Winston laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Because they do not want to know. Because admitting that I am capable of independence would mean admitting that they have wasted years treating me like a child. Because the family dynamic works better with me in the role of the damaged son who needs their protection. That is horrible. That is reality. My family needs me to be helpless so they can feel necessary. They need me to be grateful so they can feel generous. They need me to be limited so they can feel superior. Haley absorbed his words, feeling anger build in her chest. What about what you need? What I need, Winston said quietly, is someone who sees me as I actually am. Someone who understands that I have been building a life they know nothing about, creating possibilities they cannot imagine. What kind of possibilities? Winston studied her face for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Meet me on the terrace after dinner tonight. And Haley, do not mention this conversation to anyone else in the family. Not yet. Why not? Because what I'm about to show you will change everything, and once it is changed, there will be no going back. The rest of the day passed slowly. Haley tried to focus on learning the household routines and settling into her new environment, but her mind kept returning to Winston's words. What was he hiding? What had he built that his family knew nothing about? And why was he finally ready to share his secrets with her? Dinner was another formal affair, with the same careful conversations and polite distance. But now, Haley watched the family interactions with new understanding. She saw how they talked around Winston rather than to him, how they made decisions about his life without consulting him, how they maintained the fiction that they were protecting him when they were actually controlling him. When Patricia mentioned that she had scheduled a doctor's appointment for Winston the following week, Haley watched his reaction carefully. His expression remained neutral, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested frustration or anger. What is the appointment for? Haley asked. Just a routine checkup, Patricia replied smoothly. We like to monitor his condition regularly, make sure his medications are still appropriate. I see. And Winston, how do you feel about that? The question seemed to surprise everyone at the table. Patricia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Richard looked up from his plate with raised eyebrows. Marcus and Stephanie exchanged glances. I think regular medical care is important, Winston said carefully. Of course it is. But I was wondering about your own assessment of how you have been feeling lately, whether you think any adjustments to your treatment might be helpful. Another moment of silence around the table. Haley realized she had violated some unspoken rule by asking Winston to voice an opinion about his own health care. Winston's medical needs are quite complex, Patricia said finally. Dr. Harrison has been treating him for years and understands his case thoroughly. I'm sure he does, but Winston is the one living in his body every day. His perspective must be valuable. Winston tends to minimize his symptoms, Richard added. He has always been reluctant to admit when he is struggling. That is why we prefer to rely on professional medical judgment rather than his own assessment. Haley looked at Winston, who was cutting his food with careful precision and avoiding eye contact with anyone at the table. She saw a man who had learned to hide his thoughts and feelings, who had been systematically excluded from decisions about his own life. "That must be frustrating," she said quietly, and Winston's eyes met hers briefly. In that look, she saw gratitude mixed with something that might have been relief. After dinner, Haley waited until the family had settled into their evening routines before slipping out to the terrace. Winston was already there, sitting at a small table with his laptop open and papers spread around him. In the soft light from the house, he looked focused and purposeful, nothing like the frail invalid his family believed him to be. "Thank you for coming," he said as she approached. "Thank you for trusting me enough to invite me." Winston gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Haley. There are some things I need to show you." She settled into the chair and looked at the documents scattered across the table. Even upside down, she could see letterheads from banks, investment firms, legal offices, official-looking papers with signatures and seals. "For the past 8 years," Winston said quietly, "I have been running a series of online businesses, web development, digital marketing consultation, investment management for small business clients. I started with nothing but time and a computer, and I have built it into something significant." Haley stared at him. "Online businesses. The beauty of the internet is that no one cares about your physical limitations if you can deliver results. I can work from anywhere, at any pace, without anyone knowing or caring about my health issues." Winston turned the laptop toward her. "This is my primary business website." Haley looked at the screen and felt her world shift. The website was professional, sophisticated, clearly the work of someone with extensive technical knowledge and business acumen. Testimonials from satisfied clients praised Winston's expertise and innovation. Contact information listed only an email address and phone number, no indication that the business was run by someone his family considered barely capable of managing his own daily routine. "Winston," she breathed. "This is incredible. It gets better." He pulled up another screen, this one showing financial statements and account balances. "I now have 7 regular clients who pay me substantial monthly retainers for ongoing digital marketing and web development services. I manage investment portfolios for 12 small business owners, and I have been developing a software application that I plan to license to other marketing firms." The numbers on the screen were staggering. Winston was not just earning a modest income from his computer work, he was building wealth that rivaled what the family farm generated. "How is this possible?" Haley asked. "How have you kept this hidden from them?" "It is easier than you might think. They assume that because I spend time on my computer, I am reading or playing games or doing harmless research. They have never asked to see what I am actually working on, and I have never volunteered the information. All my business correspondence goes to a post office box in town. All my phone calls happen when they are not around. My bank accounts are at a different institution than the family uses." "But Winston, this changes everything. You are not dependent on them at all. You could leave, live independently, make your own decisions about your health care." "Yes," Winston said simply, "I could." "Then why have you not?" Winston closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Fear, partly. This has been my entire world for so long that the idea of leaving feels overwhelming. And partly because I was not sure I could trust myself to make good decisions about my health without medical supervision." "What changed?" "You did." Winston looked at her directly. "For the first time in years, I have someone in my life who sees me as capable rather than fragile. Someone who asks my opinion and actually listens to the answer. Someone who makes me want to be brave enough to claim the life I have been building in secret." Haley felt tears prick at her eyes. "Winston, You are already living that life. You are already successful and independent. You just have not told anyone about it. Telling them would mean confronting 20 years of family dynamics. It would mean admitting that they have been wrong about me and that I have been wrong to let them control my life. It would mean risking everything on the belief that I can actually handle independence. What would you risk exactly? The worst thing that could happen is that they get angry and you have to leave. But you already have the resources to leave. You already have the ability to support yourself. Winston was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the dark gardens. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I suppose what I would really be risking is the fantasy that someday they will see me as I am without me having to force the issue. The hope that someday they will respect my capabilities without me having to prove them. That hope is never going to be realized, Winston. They have too much invested in seeing you as helpless. It makes them feel important, needed, superior. They will never voluntarily give that up. I know. I have known that for years. But it was easier to live with the fantasy than to face the confrontation. Haley reached across the table and touched his hand. You do not have to face it alone anymore. We are partners, remember? Whatever you decide to do, we can do it together. Winston turned his hand palm up and squeezed her fingers gently. What are you saying? I am saying that if you are ready to stop hiding who you really are, I am ready to support you. If you want to confront your family with the truth about your capabilities, I will stand with you. If you want to establish your independence, I will help you do it. Even though it would mean upending the life you just started here. Winston, the life I started here is based on lies. Your family brought me here to be your caretaker because they believe you need taking care of. But you do not need a caretaker. You need a partner. Someone who sees your worth and helps you claim the respect you deserve. And if they react badly, if they try to cut me off from the family entirely. Haley looked around at the estate, at the evidence of wealth and privilege that surrounded them. Then she looked back at Winston, at the intelligence and determination in his eyes. Then we will build our own family. We will create our own traditions. We will make our own success story. Winston stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. The careful control he had maintained for so long began to crack, revealing vulnerability and hope, and something that might have been love. Haley Peterson Caldwell, he said softly, I think you might be the bravest person I have ever met. We will see about that tomorrow, she replied. Because if we are going to do this, if we are going to tell them the truth, I think we should do it all at once. No more secrets, no more pretending, just honesty, consequences and all. All at once? I think you should show them exactly who you are and what you have accomplished. I think you should tell them that you do not need their protection or their control. And I think we should make it clear that our marriage is going to be a partnership between equals, not a caregiving arrangement. Winston was quiet for so long that Haley began to worry she had pushed too hard, suggested changes too dramatic for him to contemplate. Finally, he spoke. There is something else you should know before you commit to this course of action. What? The money I have earned, the success I have built. It is substantial enough that I could buy out the family farm if I wanted to. I could purchase my independence outright, or I could use it as leverage to change the power dynamic permanently. Haley felt her breath catch. How substantial? Winston showed her another screen on his laptop, this one displaying investment accounts and business valuations that made her head spin. Winston Caldwell was not just financially independent, he was wealthy in his own right, potentially wealthier than the rest of his family combined. Oh my God, she whispered, so when I tell them the truth, when I reveal what I have been building all these years, the shock will be considerable. Everything they think they know about our family finances, about power and control and dependence, will be turned upside down. How do you think they will react? I have no idea. But I know that once I show them this, once they understand that I have not only been taking care of myself, but actually building wealth while they thought I was reading genealogy books, nothing will ever be the same. Haley looked at the financial statements, at the evidence of Winston's intelligence and capability and success, then looked at the man who had been hiding all of this from his own family for years. "Are you ready for nothing to ever be the same?" she asked. Winston closed the laptop and gathered the papers into a neat stack. "With you beside me, yes, I think I am finally ready for everything to change." As they walked back into the house together, Haley felt the weight of tomorrow's revelations settling around them like a cloak. By this time tomorrow night, the Caldwell family would know the truth about Winston's capabilities and independence. They would know that their assumptions about his limitations had been wrong for years. They would know that the marriage they had arranged to provide him with a caretaker had instead given him an ally. And Haley would know whether the man she had married was brave enough to claim the life he deserved, or whether the fear and family pressure would prove stronger than his desire for independence. Either way, the pretending was about to end. The next morning dawned grey and cold, matching the tension that had settled over Haley like a heavy blanket. She had barely slept, her mind churning with anticipation and anxiety about what the day would bring. By the time she made her way downstairs, the household was already stirring with its usual morning routines. Mrs. Rodriguez was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, and she looked up with knowing eyes when Haley entered. "You look like someone who did not sleep well," the housekeeper observed. "I had a lot on my mind." Mrs. Rodriguez glanced around to make sure they were alone, then moved closer. "Whatever you and Winston are planning, be careful. This family does not like surprises, and they especially do not like being proven wrong." "What makes you think we are planning anything?" "Because I saw you two talking on the terrace last night for a long time. Because Winston has been different since you arrived, more confident, more awake. And because I have been watching him hide his real life from them for years, and I think maybe he is finally ready to stop hiding." Haley studied the older woman's face. "You know about his businesses?" "I know he is not the helpless boy they think he is. I know he gets more important mail than the rest of them combined. I know he spends hours working on that computer, and it is not genealogy research." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. "I also know he needed someone like you to help him find the courage to tell them the truth. Are we making the right choice, forcing this confrontation?" "Mia, sometimes the truth hurts before it heals, but lies always hurt more in the end." Winston appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed more formally than usual in dress pants and a button-down shirt. He moved with purpose rather than his usual careful fragility, and Haley could see the difference immediately. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I hope you are both ready for an interesting day." Mrs. Rodriguez looked between them with something that might have been pride. "I will make sure you have a good breakfast. You are going to need your strength." An hour later, Winston asked his family to gather in his father's study for what he called an important family discussion. The request itself was unusual enough to raise eyebrows. Winston never initiated family meetings or asked for everyone's attention. Patricia arrived looking mildly annoyed at having her morning schedule disrupted. Richard seemed curious, but impatient. Marcus brought Stephanie, apparently unwilling to miss whatever drama was about to unfold. "This is quite unusual, Winston," Patricia said as she settled into her preferred chair. "What could be so urgent that it could not wait for a more appropriate time?" Winston stood beside the large desk. his cane resting against the chair behind him, but not being used for support. Haley noticed that his posture was straighter than she had ever seen it, his movements more confident. "I have something important to tell all of you," Winston began. "Something that will change how you understand my life and my capabilities." "Oh dear," Patricia sighed. "You have not been overexerting yourself again, have you? Dr. Harrison was very clear about the importance of managing your energy levels. This is not about my health, Mother. This is about my work." Richard frowned. "Your work? You mean your genealogy research?" "No, Father. I mean my businesses." The silence that followed was complete. Haley could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, the distant sound of gardening equipment outside. Everyone in the room was staring at Winston as if he had just announced he could fly. "Businesses?" Marcus said finally. "What businesses?" Winston moved to his laptop, which he had set up on the desk earlier that morning. "For the past 8 years, I have been running a series of online companies, web development, digital marketing consultation, and investment management. I have built these businesses from nothing into substantial enterprises that generate significant revenue." "That is ridiculous," Patricia said immediately. "Winston, you barely leave your room. You certainly do not have the energy or expertise to run businesses." "Actually, I do." Winston turned the laptop screen toward the family. "This is my primary company website. These are testimonials from clients who pay me substantial monthly retainers for my services. These are contracts I have signed with businesses across 3 states. Richard stood up and moved closer to examine the screen. His expression shifted from skepticism to confusion, to something that might have been shock. "This says you have been providing digital marketing services to Henderson Manufacturing for 2 years. He said slowly. "Henderson Manufacturing is one of our biggest competitors." "Yes, and I have helped them increase their online sales by 40%, which is why they continue to pay me $5,000 per month for my services." $5,000, Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Per month." "Per month," Winston confirmed, "and Henderson is just one of 7 clients who pay me monthly retainers. I also manage investment portfolios for 12 small business owners, and I am developing software that I plan to license to other marketing firms." Patricia stood up so quickly that her coffee cup rattled against its saucer. "This is absurd. Winston, you are not well enough to handle that kind of responsibility. Your heart condition, your mobility issues, are not nearly as limiting as you have convinced yourselves they are." Winston's voice remained calm, but Haley could hear steel beneath the surface. "I take medication to manage my heart rhythm, and I move more slowly than most people. But my mind is perfectly clear, my hands are steady enough to work on a computer for hours at a time, and I have built a business portfolio that would impress anyone in this room if you were willing to look at it objectively." Richard was still staring at the laptop screen, scrolling through client testimonials and financial projections. "These numbers. Winston, this says you generated over $200,000 in revenue last year." "That is correct." $200,000, Patricia repeated weakly. "That cannot be right." Winston opened another file on his computer. "These are my tax returns for the past 3 years. I have been paying taxes on my business income, contributing to retirement accounts and building investment portfolios. I am not just earning money, I am building wealth." Stephanie, who had been silent through the entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Wait, if this is true, if Winston has been earning this kind of money for years, then why has he been living here like an invalid?" Winston finished. "Like someone who needs constant supervision and care? That is an excellent question." Marcus sank into a chair, his face pale. "You have been pretending to be helpless while secretly running businesses worth hundreds of thousands of dollars." I have been living the life you assigned to me while building the life I actually wanted in private. There is a difference. Why? Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. Why would you deceive us like this? Because you made it clear that you were not interested in the truth about my capabilities. Because every time I tried to show you that I was stronger or more capable than you believed, you explained to me why I was wrong. Because it was easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe than to fight for the right to define myself. Richard slowly closed the laptop and looked at his son as if seeing him for the first time. You have been lying to us for 8 years. No, Father. I have been living my real life while you were focused on a fictional version of me that you created to justify your need to feel protective and necessary. That is not fair, Patricia protested. We have always acted in your best interests. We have always tried to protect you. You have always tried to control me, Winston corrected. There is a difference between protection and control, just as there is a difference between limitation and incapacity. Haley watched the family dynamics explode in real time. Patricia looked devastated, as if everything she had believed about her role as Winston's protector was crumbling. Richard appeared angry and confused, struggling to reconcile this new information with 20 years of assumptions. Marcus seemed caught between admiration for his brother's success and resentment at being deceived. So, what does this mean? Marcus asked finally. What are you saying, Winston? I am saying that the arrangements made for my care, including my marriage to Haley, were based on false premises. I do not need a caretaker. I do not need supervision. I do not need my medical decisions made for me by other people. Patricia turned to look at Haley, as if suddenly remembering she was in the room. And you knew about this? I suspected that Winston was more capable than you believed, Haley said carefully. But I only learned the details last night. Last night, Richard's voice was sharp. You have known about this deception for less than 24 hours, and you said nothing to us. It was not my secret to tell. And frankly, after watching how this family treats Winston, I understand why he felt the need to keep his achievements private. How dare you, Patricia said, her voice rising. How dare you come into this house and make judgments about our family relationships? I dare because I was brought here under false pretenses, Haley replied, her own voice growing stronger. You told me that Winston needed care and supervision. You arranged a marriage based on the assumption that he was helpless and dependent. But he is not helpless, and he is not dependent, which means this entire arrangement was unnecessary. Unnecessary? Marcus stood up, his face flushed with anger. Our family took you in, gave you security, saved your father from financial ruin, and you call it unnecessary. Your family made assumptions about what Winston needed without bothering to ask him. You created a problem that did not exist, so you could provide a solution that was not needed. That is enough. Richard's voice cut through the rising tension like a blade. Winston, if what you are saying is true, if you have really been capable of this level of independence all along, then you have made fools of all of us. That was never my intention, but it was the result. Do you have any idea how this makes us look, how this makes our family appear to the community? Winston stared at his father. You are worried about appearances, about what people will think when they find out that your disabled son is actually a successful businessman. I am worried about the fact that you have been deceiving us for years while allowing us to make decisions based on information we now know was false. What decisions, Father? What important family decisions were based on my supposed limitations? Richard and Patricia exchanged a look that communicated volumes. Haley saw something pass between them, some shared understanding that neither of them wanted to voice. Answer him, Haley said quietly. What decisions did you make based on Winston's supposed limitations? Another long silence. Finally, Marcus spoke up, his voice reluctant. "The will," he said. "Father's will leaves the farm and the family business to me because Winston was considered unable to handle the responsibility." Winston went very still. "I see. It made sense at the time," Richard said defensively. "We thought you needed care, not responsibility. We thought the burden of running the family operation would be too much for your health. So you decided that Marcus would inherit everything, and I would remain a dependent member of the family for the rest of my life. We decided to structure things in a way that would protect everyone's interests, including my interests, especially your interests. You would have been provided for, Winston, always." Winston laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Provided for by the brother who inherited what should have been mine, dependent on his goodwill and his family's tolerance for my continued presence." "It does not have to be that way," Patricia said quickly. "Now that we know about your capabilities, we can discuss changing the arrangements." "Can we? You can just change your minds about 20 years of decisions. You can just pretend that you did not write me out of my own inheritance because you decided I was too weak to handle it." The room erupted in shouting. Patricia was defending their choices, insisting that they had acted out of love and concern. Richard was demanding to know why Winston had not told them about his business success sooner. Marcus was arguing that the inheritance arrangements were legal and settled. Through it all, Winston remained calm, watching his family tear itself apart over revelations that he had been living with for years. Haley found herself admiring his composure, even as her heart broke for the isolation he must have felt. Finally, Winston raised his hand for silence. "There is more you need to know." "More?" Patricia's voice was strained. "What more could there possibly be?" Winston turned to his laptop again and opened a new set of files. "The money I have earned over the past 8 years has not just been sitting in checking accounts. I have been investing it, growing it, building a portfolio that now represents substantial wealth." He turned the screen toward them again, and Haley watched their faces as they processed what they were seeing. "This says you have assets worth over $2 million, Richard said slowly. $2.4 million to be precise. $2.4 million, Marcus repeated numbly. "Which means," Winston continued, "that I am not only financially independent, I am actually wealthier than the family farm operation. I could buy out your mortgage tomorrow if I wanted to. I could purchase my own property, start my own agricultural business, or simply continue building my technology companies while living anywhere I choose." The silence that followed was deafening. Haley could see the family struggling to absorb this final revelation, to understand that the son they had written off as a burden was actually more successful than any of them. "You could buy out the farm." Richard's voice was barely a whisper. "I could buy the farm, the house, and most of the surrounding property without significantly impacting my overall financial position." Patricia sank into her chair, as if her legs would no longer support her. "I do not understand. If you have been so successful, if you have been so capable, why did you stay here? Why did you let us treat you like an invalid, like a child, like someone whose opinions did not matter?" Winston's voice was quiet but intense. "Because this was my family, because I hoped that someday you would see me as I really am, without me having to force the issue. Because I was afraid that if I revealed my success, you would think I had only achieved it to spite you, rather than because I needed to prove to myself that I could." "And now," Marcus asked, "now I have someone in my life who sees my worth without needing proof. Someone who encourages my independence instead of fearing it. Someone who makes me want to stop hiding and start living openly. All eyes turned to Haley, who felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. She understood that this was the crucial moment, the point where she could either support Winston's bid for independence or allow the family pressure to push them back into old patterns. "Winston is right," she said clearly, "about all of it. You have spent years making decisions about his life without consulting him, treating him like a burden instead of recognizing his capabilities, and building a family structure that excluded him from his rightful place. And now that he has shown you proof of his success and independence, you are more concerned about your own embarrassment than you are about his feelings." "How dare you?" Patricia said again, but with less conviction than before. "I dare because someone needs to say it. Winston has spent 8 years building a life that any of you would be proud to claim, and he has done it while being treated like a sick child by his own family. He has shown more strength and resilience than anyone in this room, and instead of celebrating his achievements, you are worried about how his success makes you look." "We did not know," Richard protested. "How could we have known if he never told us?" "You could have asked," Haley replied. "You could have encouraged him to try new things instead of assuming he could not handle them. You could have treated him like an adult instead of making all his decisions for him. You could have seen his intelligence and determination instead of focusing only on his limitations." "And what do you suggest we do now?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with anger. "Pretend that the last 20 years never happened. Restructure our entire family dynamic because Winston decided to reveal his secret life. I suggest you start treating your brother with the respect he deserves," Haley said firmly. "I suggest you acknowledge that your assumptions about his capabilities were wrong and that your decisions about his future need to be reconsidered. And I suggest you recognize that Winston and I are partners, not caregiver and patient." "Partners," Patricia's voice was sharp. "You have been married for 3 days. And in those 3 days, I have seen more evidence of Winston's strength and capability than his family has acknowledged in 20 years. We may not have married for love, but we have built something real based on mutual respect and shared goals." Winston moved to stand beside Haley, his presence solid and supportive. "Haley is right. Our marriage may have started as a business arrangement, but it has become a partnership. She sees me as I am, not as you want me to be. She encourages my independence instead of fearing it. And she has given me the courage to stop hiding from you." "So what are you saying?" Richard asked. "Are you leaving? Are you cutting ties with your family?" Winston was quiet for a long moment, and Haley could see him weighing his words carefully. "I'm saying that I want to be part of this family, but not as the helpless son who needs constant protection. I want my opinions to matter. I want to be included in family decisions. I want my achievements to be acknowledged rather than hidden, and I want Haley to be treated as my wife and partner, not as my caretaker." "And if we cannot accept those terms?" Marcus asked. "Then Haley and I will build our own life elsewhere. I have the resources to do exactly that." The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. Haley could see the family struggling with the choice Winston had presented them: accept him as he really was, or lose him entirely. Patricia was the first to break the silence. "I need time to think about this, all of this, 20 years of being wrong about your capabilities. It is not something I can just accept and move on from immediately." "I understand that," Winston said gently, "but I need you to understand that I cannot go back to pretending to be helpless. I cannot return to the old dynamic where my opinions do not matter and my achievements are ignored. Too much has changed." "What about Dr. Harrison?" Patricia asked suddenly. "What about your medical care? If you have been managing your own health all this time—" "I have been managing my own health very successfully. I take my medications as prescribed, I monitor my symptoms, and I adjust my activities based on how I feel rather than on arbitrary restrictions imposed by others. My health is better now than it has been in years, partly because I am not constantly stressed by feeling trapped and undervalued. But your heart condition is real but manageable. The limitations you have imposed on my life are far more restrictive than anything my cardiologist has ever recommended. You have been protecting me from risks that do not exist while ignoring strengths that do. Richard stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the family land that Winston could now afford to purchase outright. "If we had known," he said quietly, "if we had understood what you were capable of, you would have what? Treated me differently, included me in family decisions, considered me for inheritance rather than assuming I needed to be taken care of." "Yes," Richard said simply, "all of that. Then do it now. Treat me as your capable son rather than your burden. Include Haley in family gatherings as my wife rather than my caretaker. And consider whether the family business might benefit from my skills and success rather than just my brother's traditional approach." Marcus stood up abruptly. "You want to be included in the family business? You want a share of the inheritance that was settled years ago? I want what I should have had all along if you had not decided I was too weak to handle it. And what about me? What about the life I have built, based on the understanding that I would inherit the family operation?" Winston looked at his brother directly. "Marcus, my success does not diminish yours. My capabilities do not threaten your position in the family. There is room for both of us to contribute, both of us to succeed, both of us to be valued, but not if you buy out the farm. Not if you use your wealth to change the power structure of the family. I have no intention of buying out the farm unless I am forced to leave the family entirely. What I want is to be recognized as an equal partner in our shared heritage." The room was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, less explosive, more contemplative. Haley could see each family member processing Winston's words, trying to understand how their relationships might change if they accepted his newfound independence. "I think," Patricia said finally, "that we all need time to absorb what we have learned today. This is not the kind of situation that can be resolved in a single conversation." "I agree," Winston said. "But I also want to be clear that Haley and I will not return to the old patterns while you decide how you feel about the new reality. We are partners. We make decisions together. We will not pretend that she is here to take care of me or that I need supervision to manage my daily life." "Where will you live?" Richard asked. "Will you stay here while we work through these changes?" Winston looked at Haley, and she saw the question in his eyes. This was their choice to make together. "We will stay," she said firmly. "This is Winston's family home, and he has every right to be here. But we will live as a married couple, not as patient and caretaker, and we expect to be treated with the respect that any adult family members deserve." "Fair enough," Richard said after a moment. "We all have some serious thinking to do about how we move forward from here." As the family began to disperse, each member lost in their own thoughts about what had been revealed, Patricia approached Winston and Haley. "Winston," she said quietly, "I want you to know that everything we did, every decision we made about your care, came from love. We may have been wrong about your capabilities, but we were not wrong about wanting to protect you." "I know, Mother. But love without respect is not enough. Protection without trust is just another form of control." Patricia nodded slowly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I see that now, and I am sorry. I am sorry we did not ask you what you wanted. I am sorry we did not see what you were capable of. I am sorry we made you feel like you had to hide your achievements from us." Winston moved closer to his mother and gently embraced her. "We can start over, Mother. We can build something better based on truth instead of assumptions." "I would like that," Patricia whispered. "I would like that very much." After the family had left the study, Winston and Haley found themselves alone with the wreckage of 20 years of family dynamics scattered around them. The laptop still displayed evidence of Winston's success, but the real revelation had been about much more than money or business achievements. "Are you all right?" Haley asked gently. Winston sank into his father's desk chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "I think so. It is strange, finally telling them the truth after hiding it for so long." "How do you feel?" "Relieved, terrified, hopeful, free." Winston looked up at her with a smile that was part joy and part disbelief. "For the first time in 20 years, they know who I really am. Whatever happens next, at least there are no more lies between us. And what do you think will happen next?" "I think they will struggle with this for a while. I think they will have to completely reimagine their understanding of me and my place in the family. I think there will be difficult conversations about inheritance and business decisions and medical independence. And us? What happens to us?" Winston stood up and moved to where she was sitting, taking her hands in his. "Us, I hope, we build something beautiful. We take this partnership that started as a practical arrangement and see if we can grow it into something deeper. Something like love. Something exactly like love, if we are both brave enough to try." Haley felt tears prick at her eyes. "I think I am already halfway there, Winston Caldwell." "Good," he said softly, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Because I have been falling in love with you since the moment you asked to hear my thoughts about our marriage arrangement. You were the first person in years to treat me like my opinions mattered. They do matter. You matter. Everything you have built, everything you have achieved, everything you have endured, it all matters." That evening, dinner was a surreal experience. The family gathered around the same table, but everything had changed. Winston sat straighter, spoke more confidently, participated fully in conversations instead of remaining silently on the periphery. Patricia kept glancing at him as if she could not quite believe what she was seeing. Richard asked his opinion about business matters for the first time in memory. Marcus struggled visibly with his brother's transformation from burden to equal. But gradually, as the meal progressed, something began to shift. Patricia started asking Winston about his clients and business strategies. Richard wanted to understand how Winston's technology skills might complement the family's agricultural operations. Marcus began to see possibilities for collaboration rather than competition. "I have been thinking about what you said earlier," Richard told Winston over dessert. "About wanting to be included in family business decisions." "Yes. We have been considering expanding our direct-to-consumer sales, maybe developing an online presence for the farm. It occurs to me that your expertise in digital marketing might be exactly what we need." Winston's eyes lit up with interest. "I would love to help with that. I have worked with several agricultural businesses to develop their online sales platforms. And the financial side, you mentioned investment management. We have been thinking about diversifying our revenue streams, maybe exploring some non-agricultural investments. I could definitely provide guidance in that area. I have been managing diversified portfolios for years." Haley watched the conversation with growing amazement. The family was not just acknowledging Winston's capabilities, they were actively seeking ways to benefit from his expertise. It was a complete reversal of everything that had come before. Later, as she and Winston walked through the gardens in the moonlight, Haley reflected on the day's extraordinary events. "I cannot believe how much changed in one conversation," she said. 20 years of misconceptions do not disappear overnight," Winston replied. "But I think today was a good beginning. What convinced them, do you think? The money, the business success? Winston considered the question. I think it was seeing me stand up for myself. For the first time in my adult life, I refused to accept their version of who I was supposed to be. I claimed my own identity and insisted that they recognize it. And how does it feel to be seen as you really are? Liberating, terrifying. Like I can finally stop holding my breath. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. The estate looked different to Haley now, less like a prison and more like a home they might actually choose to build together. Winston, she said finally, there is something I want to tell you. What is that? When I agreed to marry you, I thought I was sacrificing my chance at real love to save my father from financial ruin. I thought I was trading my dreams for security and accepting that happiness was not something I could afford. And now? Now I realize that love does not always arrive the way we expect it to. Sometimes it grows from respect and partnership and shared courage. Sometimes it develops between two people who see each other clearly and choose to build something beautiful together. Winston stopped walking and turned to face her fully. In the moonlight, his face was open and hopeful, and completely free of the careful control he had maintained for so long. Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying that I love you, Winston Caldwell. Not the version of you that your family created, and not the successful businessman you revealed today, but the real you. The man who was brave enough to build a life in secret and then brave enough to reveal it. The man who sees me as a partner instead of a servant. The man who makes me want to be braver and stronger and more honest than I ever thought I could be. Winston's smile was radiant. And I love you, Haley Peterson Caldwell. I love your courage and your honesty and your refusal to accept limitations that other people try to impose. I love the way you see through surface appearances to the truth underneath. I love the way you make me want to claim the life I deserve instead of hiding from it. When he kissed her this time, it was nothing like the polite, respectful kiss they had shared at their wedding ceremony. This was the kiss of a man who had finally stopped pretending to be someone he was not, given to a woman who had helped him find the courage to be authentic. It was passionate and tender and full of promise for the future they would build together. 6 months later, Winston and Haley stood in the same gardens where they had first begun to understand each other. But everything around them had changed. The family business now included a thriving online division that Winston managed. Richard had restructured his will to include both sons as equal partners in the family legacy. Patricia had learned to ask Winston's opinion and actually listen to his answers. Most importantly, the marriage that had begun as a practical arrangement to solve financial problems had grown into a love story that inspired everyone who knew them. Do you ever regret it? Winston asked as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, agreeing to marry a stranger to pay your father's debts. Never, Haley replied without hesitation. That marriage arrangement brought me to you. It brought me to a life I never could have imagined for myself. It brought me to love. Even though I was the man everyone looked down on, even though I appeared to be disabled and dependent. Haley smiled, remembering the title that had once seemed to define their story, especially because of that. Because underneath all the assumptions and limitations that other people saw, you were hiding the most shocking secret of all. Which was that you were exactly the man I needed. Strong enough to build a fortune in secret, brave enough to fight for the respect you deserved, and wise enough to see that love could grow from the most unlikely beginnings. Winston pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. And what is our secret now? That we found something real in something arranged. That we built something beautiful from something practical. that we proved love can bloom anywhere if two people are brave enough to tend it. As they stood together in the garden where their partnership had first begun to bloom, Haley thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had been forced into marriage with a man everyone looked down on, a man everyone believed was limited and dependent. But the secret he had hidden was indeed shocking. Not just his financial success or business acumen, but his strength, his resilience, his capacity for love, and his determination to claim the life he deserved. And the most shocking secret of all was that from a marriage of convenience, born of debt and desperation, two people had found the kind of love that most people spend their entire lives searching for. Their story had started with forced arrangements and hidden limitations, but it had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of seeing beyond surface appearances, of refusing to accept other people's definitions of worth and capability, and of building love on the solid foundation of mutual respect and shared courage. The poor girl who had been forced to marry the farmer's disabled son had discovered that his secret would indeed change everything. But the most important change was not his wealth or success. It was the love they had built together, one honest conversation, one act of courage, one moment of seeing and being seen at a time. Together, they had proved that the heart recognizes no limitations, that true strength often hides behind apparent weakness, and that sometimes the most shocking secret of all is that two strangers can become perfect partners when they have the courage to show each other who they really are. In the end, Winston Caldwell's secret had changed everything, just as the story's title had promised. But the change was not just about money or business success or family dynamics. The change was about two people finding the courage to be authentic, to love openly, and to build a life together that honored both their individual strengths and their shared dreams. They had started as strangers bound by necessity. They had become partners united by choice. And finally, they had become lovers committed to a future they would create together, one honest day at a time. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.